Hi, good afternoon. Happy Monday to you all. And I'm Dr. Heather Williams. I'm a consultant medical physicist at the Christie Hospital in Manchester. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on creating accessible documents. The idea for this webinar was born when I was in a seminar with Caroline Briggs from the University of Cumbria, who is joining us today. As part of my ongoing training as a visiting professor at the University of Cumbria, where I teach on the healthcare science course. And I just thought her session was so useful, so helpful, had some really practical insights into how we can make our communications more accessible to everybody who is using them. So just to introduce Caroline more fully. She's the Assistive Technology Officer from the University of Cumbria and has over 20 years experience in further and higher education, focusing primarily on teacher education, learning technologies and accessibility. And where she is at the University of Cumbria currently, she's involved in supporting staff with creating accessible, inclusive content. And I'm looking forward to her sharing that expertise with us today. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Caroline. I see that you've got all your video turned off already. Thank you for that. Please keep your camera turned off unless you're actually speaking. We will have time for Q&A at the end. Please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. If you have any questions as we're going through, please do use the chat facility, which is on the same options bar in Zoom as the audio and video settings. And during the Q&A, if you'd like to ask an additional question, you can use the raise hand facility as well. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout Caroline's presentation and be summarising some of the key questions for us to address in the Q&A afterwards. If you have any technical issues, you can either email IPEM conferences at ipem.ac.uk during the presentation, or you can message them directly through the chat as well. And there will be a feedback survey about this event, and also the event will be recorded and available on the website afterwards. I'm also pleased to announce that we'll be running an additional session at 1 p.m. on the 27th of July, that's a Monday as well, looking at how to make webinars and online meetings in general more accessible. So if you have enjoyed this session, please do join us again on the 27th of July. I'll just hand over to Caroline now, and thank you very much, Caroline.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to everybody for having me today. My name's Caroline Briggs. I'm the Assistive Technology Officer at the University of Cumbria. And today I'm going to be sharing with you how best to make changes to your documents to make them more inclusive. Some of the changes that we will go through are included in the Creating Inclusive Documents help guide that we've created. And what I'd hope for you to get out of this session is to be aware that just small things and small changes in your choices can make a big difference to other students and users of your content. So the first thing to mention is font choices. And when you are choosing a font, it makes a big difference dependent on what you decide to use in your piece. And we can see here that we've got a variety of fonts. And what I would like you to do is, rather than try and memorize a list of fonts that are accessible and fonts that aren't, just look at the fonts and consider which ones do you think are more accessible. And hopefully you'll be able to see straight away that the ones that are clear, that they have this clarity about them, are the ones that are accessible. It's also important to think about age appropriateness. So Comic Sans at the bottom isn't always used in things like higher education, but great for primary when they're still writing their letters. But these are sans serif fonts is the collection, and they don't have the flicks and ticks, the little lines and bobbles that can give a calligraphy kind of effect, but those flicks and ticks are absent, making it much clearer. And the reason for that is if you think about just a couple of people's perspectives, for example, if you have dyslexia, you'll see that the text can move around, it can be wavy, it can jump up and down. So the more clear the text is, the more chance there is for that individual to interact with that content. You've also got users that are potentially partially sighted. And again, the clearer the font, the easier it is for them to read and access that content. And the next thing just to ask the question really is, how do you emphasize text? Do you embolden? Do you underline? Do you use italics? Well, there are accessible choices to be made here. And the main one is to embolden text. Again, looking at the previous slide, you could see quite easily with the wavy text, if you underlined text with that wave, it really would begin to interfere with that clarity. So emboldening is always the way to go, really. Colour is also a really good way, but you have to be careful what colours you use. So you do need to be considerate as to whether the colour is overpowering. Yellow can be a difficult one to read on a pale background. On a black background, it's great for anybody that's partially sighted, but for those that are not, again, it can be overwhelming, maybe if you're on the autistic spectrum. So consider those colours. Blues are quite popular. Red and green together, we avoid. 1 in 100 men are red-green colourblind, and 1 in 300 women. So we tend not to put red on a green background or green on a red background, because it's very much like a white cat in a snowstorm. The two just disappear to a shade of grey. Italics is not a style that we tend to suggest you write a lot of content in, because it changes the shape of the text. So again, if you're partially sighted and you do read a lot from shape, or maybe if you're dyslexic, italicizing text really does change it. It changes how it looks. Okay, the next bit that we'll just look at is our color choices. And we can see here that we've got 3 columns. And when you're making your choices, it really is around contrast. And the first column shows quite poor contrast, maybe blue text on a blue background, or a dark background with dark text. It's possible to have overwhelming colors, lime green on a yellow probably would be quite difficult to read. Now, column B tends to use more pastel colors. And a pastel background is very enabling. It's enabling for people without a disability. It's easy on the eye. It's particularly enabling for those with dyslexia and those with autistic spectrum, because it's quite gentle. It doesn't overwhelm. And actually, you'll see some of the pastel colours are the colours of the overlays that many students use. And then the final column is a dark background with a light text. So the contrast is very high. And that's particularly useful for those who are partially sighted, who need that extra contrast. It's important to find out what colours these users prefer. And there are many apps and widgets that can change the colours for the user, so they can do it themselves, which is absolutely one of the best ways, is to have your document open, not locked down, so that people can make these changes themselves if your choice doesn't quite suit their need. So the one thing to mention about column C is that that can be quite overwhelming. So it is accessible, but it's fairly inaccessible to somebody who potentially has dyslexia or autism, because use in banners is great, as I have at the top, but to have a whole page in it is quite overwhelming. And I would say that that was the case potentially for users without a disability as well. So we tend to go with column B as a general. If you were asking the question, you know, what kind of background should I be using? Your front slide, go with the column C items and your banners. But if you were looking for a content, then a pale background with a dark text will probably meet the majority of needs. But of course, if you have someone in your group that you know have specific needs, then you need to speak to them, because there is no such thing as a fully accessible resource. Everybody is different. These are suggestions, things that you can do to meet more people's needs and to make those reasonable adjustments. Okay, now this next thing I want to bring your attention to is styles and headings. And you may have come across styles and headings before. You may have seen them in Word documents. You may have even tried them and felt that it interfered with your document and thought, I'm not touching those again. But these are fabulous. They really are, and can be quite transformational for different types of users. I'm just going to bring on a document, if that's okay. There we go. Okie dokie. So if you choose to use styles, you will find yourself with a toolbar along the top. And that toolbar has a variety of different headings. Heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, title, normal. And what tends to happen is that the very first time you think, I'll have a go, and you choose one, and the font it chooses, the color it chooses, and the size doesn't suit your needs, and therefore you steer clear. But actually, if you could spend the time to just set these up, they are absolutely fabulous. So under normal circumstances, you would highlight your heading and you would maybe embolden it. But that does not communicate to the computer or the software that that is a heading. It communicates to a sighted person because it's emboldened, but it doesn't actually communicate anything else. So by telling the software that this is a heading, enables the software to do all sorts of different things. The first thing it enables them to do is, if we look down the side there, is it creates a full structure for your document, and you are able to move around the document very easily. If you've got images, it strips them out because you're just looking at the structure. If you have dyslexia, you're not overwhelmed by all the text. You can go straight to the area, color and font options, for example, that you want to. If it's a large document, you can actually move paragraphs around. You can swap them around and edit your document. You can search for keywords. And then also you could add a contents page quite easily. It really is a very helpful tool for everybody. Now, the extra thing that it enables you to do is, if this document was to be turned into a sound file, each of these titles would turn into chapters. And that would mean that a non-sighted person would be able to scan, read a document without having to start at the start and end at the end, which has massive implications for accessibility and time. So they would be able to flick through the chapters, find the bit that wanted to listen to, and select it. And that goes for all users. So these tools benefit everybody. There are many people that prefer to listen to content than to read it, or just mix it up a bit when you're facing a lot of revision potentially. Okay, so what I suggest you do is, the very first time when you go into your document, instead of going to your title or your heading 1 and highlighting it and then going to your bold and your font, is that actually you go up to your heading 1 and you right click on it and you modify it and you change it here. So you are setting all your heading 1s, and as long as you tick these 2 little boxes at the bottom, automatically update and use it for new documents, these settings will remain. And then do the same for your heading 2. Now we can see here, heading 1 is the main heading, and heading 2 sits underneath that, and heading 3 nestles underneath that. So try and think of it less about size and more about importance. You often see heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 as getting slowly smaller, often in reference to websites, but actually our headings don't always get smaller. We often just have their importance changes, and maybe we indent sometimes. So it doesn't have to be a smaller size. And then you can highlight your text and you can choose heading 1, and it will change. And then if I go down to another heading and choose a heading 2 or a heading 3, it will change those. Now, if at any point I think, you know what, I don't want my heading 1s to be size 18, I want them to be size 14, I can go up to modify and change it, and it will change all of the headings in the document. So you can actually format your page much quicker as well. So it's a very powerful tool, and I would advise you to look at that just a little bit more before you disregard it. Now I've just got a few screenshots to share on the modifying and just making sure that you're changing the heading 1 font style and the selecting the square and the circle. And I've already mentioned the benefits, continuity throughout the document and providing a structure for academic writing, and navigating a large document is very helpful indeed. Okay, the next point I'm going to move on to now is making your data accessible. And we can see here that we've got 2 charts. We've got a pie chart and a line chart. And we've used standard Microsoft colors. And the difficulty with using colors to identify your data is that the moment it is seen by somebody who is colorblind to those colors, or printing out on black and white, the information becomes inaccessible. So the suggestion that we give to you, really, there we go, they're both inaccessible, is to consider the contrast rather than the colors, because a different color can potentially only support those without any kind of color disability. So here we've got different contrasts, different shades, so that when they become black and white, as you can see, they stand out. Okay, another way of doing it is to actually change the lines from a solid line for one, and then a jagged line, and then we've got diamonds or little dots there. And that means that whatever the printing or the color, it doesn't matter. You can still use color, but it's not the identifier. Using color as an identifier is particularly inaccessible to many different users. Okay, we've got another one here, which is using, again, different kinds of lines, and you can easily see which line is which. Now, something you do need to do with any chart or table is to format the table and to add alt text. And alt text is alternative text for a screen reader. And I will just show you how to do that using these examples here. And the first thing to share is that if a screen reader was to read a table, it wouldn't necessarily know where to start and in which order to read the data. So we can see in the first table, we've highlighted the top row. But as I mentioned before, highlighting, emboldening something doesn't communicate to the software that that is a title. We need to tell the system. So it would almost surely read it out as name, hair color, shoe size, age, Harry Jones, brown, 10, 35, Sarah Denver, red, 7, 42. If you imagine a complex table, that is not helpful. And actually, if we look at the example below of it being read out, you can see that it soon becomes far too complex to understand. So I'm just going to share with you an example and just show you how to set it. So we have a simple table here. And when I select the table, I get this little toolbar here at the left-hand side. And it says header row and first column. Well, this isn't a first column of headings. So I'm going to untick that. But it does have a header row. It doesn't have a total row or a last column, but it does use banded rows, which we going across. And I will shade these so that they, under normal circumstances, I would have them shaded. So a light blue potentially, and then white, and then a light blue, and then an off-white again. And that communicates that the table titles are across the top. So that's as simple as that on this side. And then the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Layout, and I'm going to click Repeat Header Rows. And that means that the moment it goes off the page, it will repeat these headers along the page. And so if I was to continue down the page, it would continue and then it would repeat. And then the final thing I'm just going to show you, I'm going to right click, Table Properties, and Alt Text. Alternative text is what is read out by a screen reader, somebody that is potentially partially sighted or blind, that needs to listen to the information rather than being able to read the table. Now, tables can be difficult to complex tables to do this. However, it's really important for you to communicate the key message of what you're wanting your students to take away. If it is a fairly straightforward table, you may just replicate the information in it, but it may also be that you communicate the purpose of the table or what it shows rather than just detailing data. So consider the actual value of the alt text to the user rather than thinking, right, how do I describe this table in exactly the way it is? Consider the fact that this person potentially isn't sighted, and actually what they need is the learning outcome of this particular table, what you want the users to take away with them. So it may not be exactly the same experience as the other students because of the complexity of the table. The other important thing is to contextualize it. So why are you doing this? Why is the table important? So you would put your title in. So the title of the is shoe size, and the description could be this table shows 4 users, 2 men, 2 women, who have sizes size 5 to 11, ranging from size 5 to 11, and ages to size from 24 to 45. And then you could go on to say that this table shows that there is a correlation between male and larger shoe size and female and smaller shoe size. So you're sharing an outcome, a learning outcome, rather than necessarily describing every single piece of data, if that's what you need them to take away. So it's very much a descriptive activity that is up to you, and you put the text in here and it reads it. Now, the actual other students aren't going to be able to see this. To see alt text, they would need to right click, go to format and click on alt text. So whatever you put in here isn't going to impact on other students if it is slightly different. Okay, the last thing I'd like to mention is the accessibility checker. And the accessibility checker exists in Microsoft products and Adobe products as well, PDFs particularly. And when you finished a document, it's really worth going to the file where you would normally do save as or save and clicking on check for issues and check accessibility. The things I've gone through today, other than color, it will highlight. It will come up with the tables missing titles, missing alt text, images missing alt text as well. It will check for a variety of different accessibility needs in your document and will provide you with a list. And what it also does, it provides you with how you correct it, which is really powerful. So you don't have to remember to right click on the item and then to click format and then click alt text, because it steps you through it. Now this is a PowerPoint example here, but if you have Office 365, the latest one, you'll almost surely find it on the main check accessibility toolbar. And it really is worth taking a look. Just when you've completed something, go through the checker. It takes literally a couple of seconds and will highlight any titles that you've missed and any alt text that you've missed. Now I'm just going to bring it back round now to mention that the booklet that we've created, Heather, myself, and with the IPEM with Eva, also looks at subtitling and using multimedia as well. So it really is worth having a look at it on the IPEM website. The link is displayed there, but you can just go straight to the blog under equality and diversity and find it that way as well. So thank you very much indeed. I'm going to hand back to Heather now. Okay, thank you, Heather.
We just had the one question through on the chat about the different versions of Office, and are you aware of, which versions of Office have got this functionality and which ones maybe don't? Where's the line between what we can do all of this and where we can't?
They're definitely improving. I imagine that if you don't have the latest of the newer Office 365, which has got all the bells and whistles on and was the last screenshot I shared with it on the toolbar, then you've probably got 2007 or 2010, and both of those have it on the file and save. So that first screenshot where it says check for errors, and it's super. It really is, and it steps you through each of the changes that you can make, but each of those things is also in the booklet, so you could easily have the two together. But the nice thing about the Microsoft Office is that it says right click here, or the issue is with image number 3, and boom, you're straight at image number 3. So it really does hold your hand through changing the different functionality. It really is super like that.
Yeah, it's a key point, isn't it? I mean, the accessibility checker does help you with the structuring, but quite a lot of this can be done with just reference to the guide. You don't need the software to step you through it. You can implement all of those changes yourself and it'll have the same effect.
That's right. That's right. And of course, we're looking at Microsoft Word here and Microsoft PowerPoint, but Adobe PDFs have it as well, a accessibility checker. So it could be that a lot of the programs that you're using have that built in, even if you don't use Microsoft products. They're still there and they're checking for the same things. So don't feel as though the goalposts since the new regulations have come out aren't changing, because we now know what we need to do to create accessible content. And we never really knew that before. We were told make reasonable adjustments. And it's like, well, what's reasonable? Well, it's what is reasonable. And the regulations have stated now, you know, font color, you using styles, the things that we've gone through there to enable a document to be transferred into another format. And it really is enabling.
That's great. It's so good to have clarity, isn't it?
It is clarity.
I was just wondering, does anyone else have any other questions? I've just got, if you can be thinking about that. I've just had one question into the chat. Which regulations were those, just to be clear,
yes.
the ones that we're talking about?
So they are the Web Accessibility 2018 regulations, and they've been coming through for the last 2 years. And the September the 23rd this year is when we start needing to use subtitles on our videos that are pre-recorded. So there are different rules that have been slowly brought in to effect, and what we've been doing at the university is looking at all of the rules and saying this is what we need to do, knowing that some things, for example subtitling, doesn't come in until September, but actually we're not really interested in that. It's more what is the list of items that are considered to be making reasonable adjustments. And as an accessibility I suppose professional, I think it's wonderful. I do. To just have a little bit of support, saying you must be looking at this and you must be improving what you send out digitally, because that's what the Web Accessibility and App digital regulations. So they're worth a look. But a lot of it is in, again, a lot of it is in the booklet. So you don't have to go directly to the source necessarily, because the booklet should provide you with the key information you need.
I think that's the thing, is that there are going to be many things that are available from those guidance, particularly for an online communication that is directly relevant to printed media as well. Would you like to say a little bit about how these principles apply differently in those two settings, whether it's an online or a printed document?
You're right that they're different. White, for example, on a piece of paper is not white, but white on a monitor can blow you away when it comes to glare and being able to read something. So it could be that reading text on a white piece of paper has nothing like the impact of having particular colours on a screen, which is why the contrast is so important. It really comes alive to the colours. Well, if you're somebody that needs colours not to come alive, you need them to be soft, accessible, you need to be able to read them for a period of time, then you need pastel colours. You don't need black. You need just off black, slightly grayer. And actually, if you've ever looked at websites, they don't use the blackest of black, and they don't use the whitest of white. They bring the shades down because it's just much too overwhelming. So it's very, very different. I mean, Times New Roman is considered to be acceptable for a book, but on a screen, the flicks and ticks are too much. They interfere. So they are different. Yeah, it is interesting.
Just had another question on the chat. Do you have a link that would summarise this legislation, or where would we look to find it?
I mean, I can share that with you afterwards if that's okay, because we've been sharing materials within the university about the different regulations and what they mean for us, and how that impacts on creating materials. And that's really where the booklet came from. In the session we did together was just an introduction to, come on guys, you know, we really need to be doing this. But yes is the answer. Would that be okay to share through yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, we can send, we've already mentioned, for those who missed the introduction, this session is being recorded, and we can send out the link to the leaflet that we've discussed, and also the link to the relevant legislation as well, so that people can be looking at that and be familiar with the details of the requirements. But as you said, the whole point of writing this booklet was to say, you know, this is what you need to do, and to give a bit of a how-to guide. So another question just had through, Microsoft has downloadable accessible templates. Would you recommend any of them?
You're right that they do. When I mentioned earlier about there's no such thing as an accessible resource, that can be true because of the colours that are chosen potentially. But yes, they are better. There is no doubt. The font is usually clearer. The colours, they can use red quite a lot in their accessible PowerPoint templates, which can be a little bit overwhelming. But again, if they're only using it on the front slide and they don't have it as the background with white text on for all of their content, then that's not too overpowering. What would be nice is for a user to look at something and think, is that nice on the eye? Is that easy on the eye? Do those colours clash? Does that text look clear and have clarity? So yes, it will set the font and it will set the colour scheme. But if you start to add tables and things like that, you will still have to add the alt text. But yeah, I'd say it was a good starting point. Rather than some of the templates where they have geometric shapes that send you into a vortex.
Yeah, I think often we underestimate how important clarity is in a document, and to avoid any sort of visual distractions.
Right.
Are there, just to give a couple of examples, you said about the Microsoft accessible templates and their use of colour. I remember from the presentation you gave last summer that there's sometimes a bit of tension between appropriate colour choice and how that makes it harder to read for other groups. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
And it's really difficult because in some ways you're looking at the numbers in society that would benefit from a particular colour. So you may see blue used quite a lot, and purple, but there are eyesight conditions where purple, I have purple in my presentation as a background with the white text just for the banner, but some people don't like the purple. The black and the yellow is often used for sight impaired, but can be very overpowering for somebody on the autistic spectrum, for example, or just a user, because we forget that users without a specific disability also have learning needs. So the pastel colours provide the most accessible experience for the vast majority of users, because it's easy on the eye. And then for specific learners, specific users, you would have a resource that can be changed, which is key. We no longer lock down our resources so they can't be changed as much. In fact, our PDF booklet that's gone out, you can still change the color, you can still change the zoom and the reflow of it so that it gets bigger. So actually not locking down your colors so that you can meet the needs of people is equally as important as making those choices so that they can change it. I suppose it's truly personalized in that way. There was a time our VDLE would only take locked down documents so that people couldn't change it. But actually changing for accessibility is really helpful.
So do you just want to say a bit more about that, about the characteristics of that PDF format and what it allows people to change?
Yeah, well, the first thing would be the reflow. You come across reflow before. When you zoom into a document, a website, for example, you wouldn't want to zoom into the top left-hand corner and then have to use your right and bottom toolbars to navigate that page. You'd be going across the page and then up the page because you would only have a very small square that you would be looking at. Now, reflow enlarges the page but changes the order of everything. So you get the whole page in that enlarged area and you just scroll up and down. So there's no left and right, there's no searching for, it is no longer a spotlight on an aspect of your page. It actually changes the page. And that's the same with reflow on PDFs. It makes it bigger and then the user just goes up and down to read through the content. You can also enlarge the space between characters to make it clearer. And the space between lines, and colors can be changed as well. The background color, the foreground color. And then finally, because we use styles, which I mentioned at the start, you could take that PDF and you could have it turned into a chapterized braille. You could have it turned into chapterized sound, which if you imagine being sight impaired and having to use a document where somebody else would scan read something or look at the contents, and you as a user has to read the whole page, you know, the whole lot. So the chaptering is massively important for a user to be able to say, I just want to read this bit and just jump straight to that bit of sound. So that the styles are becoming more and more well known and used, and our document does that. Just by doing the things that we've done in the booklet and we've done today. So nothing special really. It's just making choices.
So I mean, this obviously has implications for all communications. I mean, in terms of, for example, our patient information leaflets. If all of our PDFs were able to be downloaded and read in this way and adapted to the user, then that would have a much better reach. It's not just about teaching materials. It's not just about internal communications. Another question on the chat: are we planning on subtitling our next webinar, given that given that we've advised that? It's a very poignant question following our own advice.
Well, live webinars don't have to be subtitled. However, recorded ones do. So the moment this is used again, it will need to be subtitled. And those of you that use Microsoft products, be pleased to know that Microsoft Stream, which is part of the Office 365, will do it automatically for you. Or you could upload it to YouTube and their automatic subtitling or captioning will do it for you. Or you could use Teams, which I don't know if you've come across the Teams subtitling. And then finally, Office PowerPoint. as I was talking, it can automatically do the subtitles. So yes is the answer. I suppose I've wriggled out of it a little bit by saying we don't have to with live. What's really good, we're on Zoom at the moment. I think if we were in Teams and doing this, you would be able to turn on subtitles and another observer would be able to not have them, which is the ideal, the choice. And that would always be there for you. So the systems are really catching up, I would say, and Office particularly have gone into this in a big way. But yes is the answer. This will have subtitles, and we could have used the Microsoft PowerPoint built-in subtitles, and maybe if we do another accessibility webinar, we may do that. We show you how to use them.
And that's definitely the intention. On the 27th of July, it's a Monday as well, at 1 p.m. We'll be looking at making settings like this more accessible. So for those of us who are basically living in Zoom and Teams at the moment, how do we make that a more accessible and inclusive experience? So we're now 4 minutes to the hour, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just enough time for a quick cup of tea if you have a meeting starting at 1. So thank you very much, Caroline, for your time and for collaborating with us on this guide. And I'd really encourage everyone to go and have a look and reflect on how they can modify their own internal documents to make them more accessible and more readily available to a wider audience. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you all on the 27th of July.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.